Hey YouTube, here again to talk about things going on in the world around us. And it is not a really um, big stretch of a statement to say that this is a very sensitive subject, considering there have been 3 mass shootings in the past 2 weeks, at least in the United States. At least that's what we know of. But there is something that came up that I really need to talk about, and came up during Joe Rogan's podcast with Bernie Sanders when Joe Rogan pushed back as feebly as he could with Bernie Sanders when it came to gun control, and he asked him, "Well, what do you think about these people who don't like the term assault weapons? And what do you say to them?" Bernie Sanders, of course, does not understand the question at all because he doesn't understand what assault weapons are. And I know I sound like a bit of a jerk to say this, but I think most people who speak out against guns don't either. And I'll just jump out and say what assault weapons are and speak a little bit about the etymology of the word, the term. Assault weapons are a term created by mass media to describe uh, military style weapons. And this term was first used in the 90s when the Brady Bill was presented and passed, and it was used in campaigns to ban military style weapons from the American people. However, at the time, in the 90s when this term was used, when they were saying military style weapons, that's what they actually were. What was actually banned in the Brady Bill, and in most states this is still the case, were weapons that are used in war that were converted into legal gun ownership, like the M16 or the AK-47, the actual weapon that was used in the battlefield that was converted into semi-automatic. Now, the whole intention of the Brady Bill was to take those off the streets because you can convert something that's been taken from fully automatic into semi-automatic back into fully automatic, and that was really dangerous, apparently. Problem is, now people have adjusted the definition and have moved the goalpost into what it is now, and what is still kind of moving on in terms of the playing field, which is now anything that looks like a military style weapon is an assault weapon. Because apparently any AR-15 can perform like an M16, or any AR-15 variant is a weapon of war. Actually, definitely not the case. In fact, very commonly owned AR-15 variants are those that are 22 in caliber, and 22s are like that big, and in a battlefield, it would bounce off of people because war is fought at times nearly a mile apart. And 22s, honestly, if you wanted to kill someone with a 22, you'd have to be very, very close, very accurate with where you're aiming. So it's any gun is dangerous, but a 22 is not a weapon, nor is it a weapon that has ever been used in a mass shooting. At least, don't quote me on that, but all of the recent mass shootings were obviously performed with higher caliber weapons. In fact, the one that happened last year in where's that desert town at the end of Route 66? Bakersfield? Yeah, I think Bakersfield. That wasn't even, by people's perceived definition, an assault weapon. Wasn't even a magazine-fed rifle. And what is actually starting to happen is the definition is now turning into any semi-automatic rifle is now considered an assault weapon. Problem is that there are so many different variants of rifle, semi-automatic, that most hunting rifles that are semi-automatic would fulfill that definition, obviously, because they're semi-automatic. But there's a lot of hunting rifles that are tube fed, not magazine fed. Meaning, in order to reload it, you turn it over and you push each bullet in one by one. That's not a military style weapon, obviously. And now what you're starting to hear coming out of the woodwork are people who are very passionate about these issues and perhaps don't really understand the dynamic of guns or much about gun ownership or what it takes to own a gun, and are just claiming that all semi-automatic weapons should not be legal to own. Problem is 99% of all guns are semi-automatic, because 99.5% of guns are semi-automatic. 99.5% of pistols are semi-automatic, other than single-action revolvers or breech-loading muskets or top-loading muskets. And the common argument people have against guns is, when the Second Amendment was written, it wasn't intended to allow people to own these semi-automatic rifles. Weapons back then were top-loading muskets, and rifles were just first started coming out. On the contrary, the Second Amendment was created because the British soldiers were going door to door into people's homes and taking their guns away because of people resisting the British rule that was tyrannical. And the Second Amendment was written to push back that tyrannical rule, and that standing still exists in the Constitution of our people. It just so happens that guns aren't nearly as, at least guns that are legal to own, aren't nearly as dangerous as military style weapons. Fully automatic rifles, machine guns, stuff the military has is way more powerful than the semi-automatic rifles that the American people can legally own. And it's something that is becoming more and more of a separation between the power of the American people and the tyrannical force of the government. Another counter-argument for people who say that the Second Amendment wasn't written for I'm distracted because there's a dog that's running away that people are trying to catch. The Second Amendment wasn't written for modern day firearms. Is the First Amendment wasn't written for the internet. So what needs to happen is people need to look at the intention of the Founding Fathers in their writings and adjust to modern day advancements. And the intention of the Founding Fathers was to have the people able to defend themselves from evil forces as well as from tyrannical rule. And people in power generally don't like a very independent populace. And the more power a government can have, and the weaker the individual man can have, the more content the government is. Because the government really just needs reasons to exist. If the common man can take care of himself and doesn't need the government to pay for his every whim, then the government gets weaker and weaker, and that's the ideal situation. But every time there's a mass shooting, the government comes and says we have to ban another gun, or we have to do more to prevent people from becoming gun owners, like upping the age to 21 or 25 in some states are talking about. And that's a bit absurd, in my opinion. And Neil deGrasse Tyson did have a post about this, and he talked about the average deaths that happen in this country. And he did point out that more people die from handguns every 2 days. The amount of people that were murdered in these 2 days by mass shootings. Further, more people were shot in Chicago in the 2 days that happened, where those mass shootings were, than people were shot in those 2 mass shootings that happened back to back. Yet we don't talk about how many people are getting shot in Chicago. We only talk about, rich white people who were shot by one lone gunman. Obviously, it's completely tragic that any mass shooting happens, but it's important we recognize that a rifle is a tool, and it's terrible that rifles are used in mass shootings, but in Japan, 50 people were stabbed. Oh, sorry, China, actually. In China, 50 people were stabbed, and they didn't go and ban knives. England, however, they are trying to ban knives because England banned guns, and knife stabbings went through the roof. And another stat to share, way more people die at the hands of hammers than at guns every year, yet no one's talking about banning hammers. Over 20 times more people die in car accidents every year than people who are actually murdered by any tool of murder, yet no one talks about taking cars off the road. My whole point here is it runs deeper than just the tool, and people always focus on the gun itself. Obviously, I agree that there should be background checks for gun ownership, and that's perfectly acceptable. But the issue isn't the type of gun, because semi-automatic weapons are everywhere. There's more guns than people in this country, and that's okay, because that's just the country we have. And I'd rather have a country with guns everywhere than China or Korea, or a country will send people to re-education camps. Lastly, I just think that it really comes down to how we treat our common man, as well as, and probably more importantly, how we raise our children. Last point here on this whole situation. Most mass shooters are people coming from difficult situations at home, like single parenthood. Most crime happens from single parenthood. Most people in prison have single mothers. So if you really want to reduce murder and crime and mass shootings in that same vein, we need to be better parents and take better care of our children. And obviously there will be outliers like mental illness, but we would reduce the amount of violence considerably if we actually took care of our kids. Anyways, that's it for me. If you guys watch this whole thing, thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next one.